tagline for my company is humanizing AI for care.
We've talked about how healthcare needs to be emotionally ready before it can be technologically ready. Help people feel safe, seen, and empowered as that change happens.
Latch on something which is already there and build on that.
And hundreds of thousands of dollars on the data that powers the technology.
Most dangerous situation isn't being breached. It's being breached and not knowing it. No alert doesn't mean no breach. Often means you are not looking for the right signals. In fact, the technology accounts for only about 30 to 40% of the problem. But most organizations already have all the fancy tools that.
Today, I'm joined by Guman Chauhan, a cybersecurity leader and practitioner with deep experience helping organizations understand what their security posture actually looks like under real-world conditions. Guman holds multiple advanced security credentials, and his work focuses on breach detection, incident response readiness, and validating whether security controls actually work when it matters. What I appreciate about his perspective is that it cuts through the security theater. He challenges organizations to stop assuming they're secure and start proving it through testing, visibility, and response discipline. Organizations often measure cybersecurity maturity by policies, tools, and compliance checklists, but history shows that breaches are inevitable. The real differentiator isn't whether an organization is breached, it's whether it knows when that breach happens and how effectively it responds. Guman, you said that there are only two kinds of organizations, those that are breached and know it, and those that are breached and don't. And you've been very clear that the second group is far more dangerous. So today I want to explore what really separates assumed security from proven security, why so many breaches go undetected, and what leaders should actually be testing. Guman, welcome to the Signal Room. Excited to have you here. You know, we talked about this recently, but there's just a whole lot of activity and buzz around AI. But there's some other things that are probably a little bit more important to make sure that we're in a position where we can be using it safely. Of course, that really is around data protection, data privacy. You know, that really the space that you're in. Really want to make sure that we delve into some good content today because people really need to understand what the stakes are. So when you ask organizations, are you sure if you would know if you were breached? What do you hear most often from your clients?
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions that is, I would say, uncomfortable but when I work with the organization and when I ask this question, they say yes, we would know, and they say it with a lot of confidence, and they will point out their tools, their security operations center, or their dashboard full of green and check mark. But when I follow up with when was the last time you tested this assumption, and that's where silence start. So in a real incident, I have been seen leadership believed detection was solid, yet attacker had already had been inside for weeks or months using stolen credentials. And as you see, some of the largest breach in the world went undetected for months or even years. So in this case, attackers, were already inside, quietly moving laterally, and they were exfiltrating data and doing their work that they are supposed to do once they are inside.
Right.
So in this case, in this scenario, no malware, no noisy exploits. It will show just a legitimate access doing legitimate things, and no one noticed until a third party or customer raised the alarm.
That's the last place you want to hear about it from someone who's discovered that there's a problem, especially a client. You've talked about the different situations, and you said the most dangerous one is being breached and not even knowing it. Why is that worse than a breach that's already been identified?
Yeah, so I often say most dangerous situation isn't being breached. It's being breached and not knowing it. And the reason is simple: damage compounds silently. So when a breach is identified early, organization can act. They detect suspicious activity, trigger alerts, and that are like actionable, activate their incident response plan, contain the threat, notify stakeholder and customer. And most importantly, they learn from that incident or what happened. So over time, they strengthen control, no, to do, and they also optimize their detection rules and make sure, and they also try to close those visibility gaps, improve response time,
Right.
and retrain their team based on the lesson learned. So in this scenario, we know breach is painful, but it becomes a catalyst for maturity. Now compare that with to the more dangerous scenario when breach goes undetected. That the question that you asked. So in unknown breaches, attackers have time, and in cybersecurity, time is everything. So organization assumes silence means safety, while attackers quietly moving laterally, as we discussed, and they were doing their work. Like the one of the biggest challenge in our field is attackers can use invalid credentials, so you can't even do anything with that. So
Right.
in this scenario, those organization those cannot identify the breach, it means they never done their due diligence. The data is still being used by attacker. We never reach out to customer never done any due diligence. They never reset their password or set up MFA, and because they are totally unaware and they are unprotected still. So regulators often learn from these kind of incident after the attackers do.
Right.
So, because they don't do anything for the incident response, so no forensic investigation, no due diligence, and worst of all, no learning from the incident. So that's why I always emphasize visibility matters more than perfection, because the breach
Yes.
you can see is painful, but breach you can't see is devastating.
Yeah, it's really interesting 'cause when you talk about things being undetected, there's so many ways now that people are able to get their hands on credentials. So I think probably maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like it would be even more likely now that that would be the way that hackers are actually getting in behind the firewall because it's really hard to detect. I mean, is that what you're experiencing?
Yes, correct.
So historically, I think at least in organizations that I've been exposed to, they have alert mechanisms for breach, things like that. But oftentimes, I think that we maybe have a false sense of security. I mean, why do you think organizations stop there and they figure since they're not getting any alerts, they're fine. There's no breach going on.
Yeah, because alerts are often treated as a proxy of truth in our industry. So if dashboards are quiet, leadership assumes everything is fine. But attackers understand this better than anyone. And actually, they design attacks specifically to stay invisible. So instead of deploying malware, they use valid credentials, phishing, deepfake, and other social engineering tactics. So once they are inside in your network, they access data during normal business hour. So they stay within the expected usage threshold. It means they know when the alert can be triggered in your tools. So they are more sophisticated. So it means you never get any alert because they deliberately behave in a way that avoid triggering detection tools because they know how these tools work. And we have been seen repeatedly in cloud breaches where attackers used the admin credentials or service account. There were no expiry date on those, and they operated exactly like legitimate administrators. So you will not find any anomalies, no alarm, and no alerts because they are a valid user account. So
Right.
no alert doesn't mean no breach. Often
Yeah.
means you are not looking for the right signals, and and also don't forget that attackers have access to the more sophisticated tools in the age of AI, and it will always be a cat and mouse race.
Are there ways now that they can actually imitate or fake an IP address? Because I know that a lot of the technologies that are used to prevent breach really are tied to specific range of IP addresses within an organization or even an employee might actually be accessing from. Is there a lot of that kind of capability out there?
So in terms of IP address, it's not easy to fake spoof the IP address because those IP address are typically tied to the domain. So if you have an application that running public, like some of the public facing application, and if someone want to mimic the same application using some other IP address or same IP address, it's not possible. They can use a similar kind of domain with some change like hyphen, dot, or some extra character,
Right.
and that might trick you. And that's part of the all phishing game the attackers are doing.
Interesting. So that's actually a way that you could think about tighten up your detection if you're paying attention to the IP ranges.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we just talked about one example, but what are some of the other common reasons that breaches go undetected for extended periods of time? I know every once in a while we'll hear of one that's been ongoing, and by the time it's detected, there's just a lot of damage done.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, when the breaches go undetected for weeks or months, it's rarely because attackers extraordinarily sophisticated. It's usually because they operate in a way that look normal. The most common reason I see, as we discussed, they are using a valid account, using working as a legitimate user in your network. In cases like Colonial Pipeline and other countless cloud breaches, authentication succeeded. So no security tools assume everything was fine. And second reason I see where attackers deliberately blend into normal business activities. So like one of the breach from SolarWinds is a prime example where attackers looked like trusted administration for a month. So the third, I would say the alert fatigue that hide real attack. Security teams receive thousands of alerts every day, and they are not able to identify which one is the true or false. So, and I think I also see breaches go undetected due to the blind spot, like unknown assets, IT not collecting enough information, or a log from an device or network, excessive cloud permissions, and third-party access. One of the example, Capital One and Movie IT breaches are the reminders you that what you can't see, you can't protect. I mean, you have to understand what exactly your assets are. You can't protect if you don't know what are your assets are.
Right.
And also make sure you are collecting the enough log for your tools. There's no matter to buy a fancy tool if those tools don't have enough information to identify anomaly or any suspicious activity going on in your network. And we saw that most of the time, many organizations don't detect breaches themselves at all. They learn from banks, customers, regulators, or law enforcement. And that's a clear sign detection has failed. The pattern is consistent. Breaches go undetected not because security team don't care, but because visibility isn't validated. Alerts aren't trusted. A response delayed.
You mentioned tools here, and I think that's one of the areas that most organizations are spending a fair amount of money on. I know it's not inexpensive to try to protect an enterprise these days. But let's talk just a little bit about what some of these are. We've got CM, which is a security information and event management tool. And there's EDR, like endpoint detection and response, the orchestration, automation, and response. And then SOC, Security Operations Center. On paper, that stuff sounds pretty good. It sounds like the organization's mature. With all that, why do you think breaches still are slipping through the cracks, even with all the spend on technologies to prevent it?
Yeah, because tools don't equate outcomes, and most organizations invest in fancy AI-driven tools nowadays. And there's a lot of companies out there in the market that they are selling these kind of tools with the tag of AI-driven. And
Right.
so companies are buying tools for collecting logs, storing telemetry information and automatic workflow. And that the tools that you discussed, they are pretty standard tool that every company is using nowadays. And so you find that most of these tools are running in isolations mostly, and that's the one of the biggest gap, because they are doing their own task, they are not integrated, but they don't invest. So that's why they buy a lot of tools, but they don't invest in tuning detection. They don't invest time in validating those alerts, and they don't train engineers on real attack pattern. So no matter how much tools you buy, if they are not fine-tuned, if you are not testing those regularly, if they are really alerting for the right purpose or not. So we have been seeing environment with the world-class tools where alerts fired, but no one trusted them enough to act. And in other cases, alerts went to shared inboxes. No one was actually monitoring during off hour. In many, and saw that one of the, I saw a lot of post bridges review teams often discovered logs weren't ingested or alert weren't escalated. So I see few cases
Right.
organizations was not collecting any log from the assets because they don't know about it. So, I mean, again, I want to emphasize that you cannot protect assets if you don't know if it exists in your environment. And that's the
Yeah.
first thing that as a security practitioner have to understand. You have to know your stuff. You have to know what you are protecting.
That's an excellent point in and of itself. I know there's always been challenges in any health system that I've been around, having a good active inventory, having things actually connected so that you can monitor things in real time. How much of the breach activity that goes on is a problem with technology versus people or organizational behavior? I mean, there's definitely, ways that probably fall under each of those, but I mean, how would you say that breaks down?
Yeah, so I would say when breaches go undetected, it's rarely a pure technology failure. In fact, technology accounts for only about 30 to 40% of the problem. But most organizations already have all the fancy tools that we discussed. I think that you point out, SIEM, EDR, SOC capability in place, and they are super confident that they have everything that they need to know. But the bigger issue I think I see is our process and people. So roughly 40% of detection failure comes from broken or untested processes, unclear escalations paths. We
Right.
don't have incident response plan that exit. We have a incident response plan that exist on paper and alert that fire but aren't acted on and delays caused by approval and handoff. So this is the part of process. So
Right.
remaining 30% come from the down people and behavior. So security analysts hesitate to escalate because they fear false positive or business disruption. Leadership often prioritizes uptime over rapid containment. As a result, early warning signs are ignored and delayed.
Well,
So, I mean, as we discussed before, buying more tools or technology won't fix the detection automatically. You have to do
right.
some define those tools and make sure you have a proper process. You have a lot of process policies document, but when the last time you validate these are working as designed. And I see one also I found to that in several breaches we saw that security engineers spotted suspicious behavior, but they were hesitated to escalate because they don't want to trigger a false alarm. So that
Right.
was very interesting. Yeah.
Well, so you've kind of touched on this already a little bit, but alert fatigue is something that we hear about it in the healthcare space. We hear it a lot because there's so many alerts that are fired from the clinical record that the clinicians and the nurses are bombarded with alerts. When you have such a high volume of them, it's difficult to know what to act on. How do you think about managing alerts and really making sure that, to your point, people aren't reluctant to report something, but that what you described seems like maybe that the alerts aren't fine-tuned enough to really make sure that they understand you have to escalate this. What are some of the things that could be done to really help distinguish meaningful signals from the volume and the noise of all the alerts?
Yeah, so I think as we discuss, alert fatigue is something we hear about constantly and for a good reason because it's one of the biggest reason real attack get missed. And most security teams receive thousands of or maybe millions of emails alerts depending on the size of organizations. And as I said before, when same alert fires over and over again, engineers naturally become desensitized. And if your SOC can't clearly distinguish signal from noise, attackers don't need to be sophisticated because they just need to be patient. So the solution isn't more alert, it's a shift from volume based alerting to risk based detection. And so instead of asking, did something happen? Teams should ask, does this activity meaningfully increase business risk? So effective security teams correlate those alert and they define the asset if it's critical or not and behavior. So these teams prioritize alert tied to privileged access or sensitive data, not just technical anomalies. And they also regularly disable alert that never lead to a real incident. So I've been seeing organization reduce alert volume by 60% and actually improve detection simply by removing rules that hadn't resulted in a single actionable event in a year. The goal is not to see everything. It's to see what matters most and act it fast.
Right. That brings up when we talk about what matters, how do you even approach the testing of these applications and the risks that you may have, whether it's human behavior or it's organizational behavior or it's a technology thing? You've been a strong advocate for external testing. Why is external penetration testing still one of the most effective ways to understand the real world risk that you're dealing with?
Yeah, because it shows reality, not assumption. So many organizations hesitate to authorize full scope independent penetration testing because they are worried about business impact. And my response is simple: ships aren't built to stay in harbor. You don't learn how strong you don't learn how strong your defense are by protecting them on stress. So you learn by testing them in real conditions. Independent third party testing is one of the I would say thing that we can use, and lets you see your environment exactly as an attacker would, but in a controlled and responsible way. So external testing answers questions, the question that internal might not see, as when attacker what question like when what can attacker actually see from outside? Second question, which assets are truly exposed? And the question like which security controls fail silently? So in practice, these tests often surface uncomfortable truth, like system believed to be internal, but turn out to be internal facing. So we saw some incident where they believe it's not a public facing application, but it was. And in this scenario, we also found like old and forgotten credentials still work. And most concerning, critical alerts never fire even during active exploitation. So this kind of testing give you a real picture how your network or application or infrastructure is working from outside of the world. I think that's the part many organizations miss. Pen testing shouldn't be end with just a report. It should validate whether your security team or SOC actually detects what testers were doing. Because
Right.
that's one of the best way to optimize your SOC tool to make sure you're getting the alert if someone's trying to do something with your network or application or data. So the most
Right.
mature teams correlate test activity with alerts, fine-tune their detection rules, improve response workflow based on the real attack behavior. And today, this doesn't have to be limited to annual. Nowadays we have a annual or traditional pen testing. Nowadays we have a AI-driven security testing platform that they do pen testing regularly and can continuously simulate real world attacks on demand. And
Right.
so they can, provided they are scoped and correctly and unbiased, which is one of the reason we always go for independent third party, because make sure they are not biased. So these tools are used properly, they give organization a ongoing visibility into exposure detection and response gaps.
You've really kind of outlined some really important things, and I think the thing that I'm hearing loud and clear is you gotta test more than just your detection capability by measuring whether an alert fires or not. There's much more to it than that, and organizations really have to be aware that they need to be looking at many other factors. And honestly, organizations that are in any industry, you can pick, almost any one of them. The focus of the business is not primarily data security. You have an accountability for it, but their expertise is really running the business. So, I think what you say around having an external partner to help with that testing, I think is extremely important. Let's jump a little bit into what happens in an organization once there's been a breach. What separates organizations that are mature from those who are repeating maybe the same mistakes again and again?
Yeah, so I would say what really separates organization after a breach is how they respond to it. I see the mature organizations don't treat a breach as something to hide. They treat as it a learning moment.
Right.
They take the time to understand why it happened, and they fix the root cause and then retest their control to make sure same issue can't happen again. On the other hand, immature organizations do the opposite. they look for someone to blame and they just apply a quick fix to stop the immediate bleeding or problem
Right.
and move on as fast as possible without changing anything meaningful. And that's the differentiator between a mature and immature. And this is not about budget or tools. It comes down to accountability, follow through. Organization that mature always ask, what did this incident teach us? And
Yeah.
those are not mature. They ask, how quickly can we forget this happened? So that's the differentiator between two organizations. So the mindset is what determine whether the next breach is smaller or far more damaging.
Yeah, you're touching on something I think is really worth emphasizing. We're talking about some things that leaders really need to be aware of, much like creating psychological safety within an organization, so that if people see something that's wrong, if there is a mistake made somewhere, that they're not afraid to raise their hand, or if they see something that could be vastly improved in it. Maybe it could actually shift their focus to something else that's more high value to do for the company because we automated it. There's a culture a component to this that leadership needs to be really dialed in on. I think when I was running an IT shop years ago, one of the things that I had to really make sure that the team knew is if you find something that needs attention, don't hesitate. Just bring it, and we'll circle the wagons. We'll bring everyone together. We'll go in and take a look at what happened. We'll rectify the situation, and then we'll put some safeguards in there to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the best opportunity to close those loops is the people that are actually doing the work and they're detecting what's really happening. There's no substitute for having that kind of a culture where there's trust. And if you've heard any of the recent episodes for my listeners, I've had a conversation with a clinical psychologist who really has emphasized there's been a massive erosion of trust in human relationships over the last 20 years. And we're talking about information security. We're trying to keep nefarious actors from accessing our environment. That's one of the aspects. But then there's also the inadvertent mistakes that people can make with technologies. So it's got to be an environment where people are not afraid to speak up if they see a risk. And I really appreciate that you emphasize that. I think we're getting towards the end of our time, but I want to just kind of get some bigger picture things that you can share with the audience, the things that they can actually carry away from this. If an organization could do just one thing this year to improve their breach readiness, what would you recommend that they do?
I mean, to be honest, my recommendation is simple. Just test a real incident end to end, not just a tabletop exercise where everything goes according to plan. So plan something, simulate an actual breach and see what really breaks.
Right.
Test whether alerts fire, whether they reach the right people, whether anyone has the authority to act. Test how quickly leaders are notified, how legal and security coordinate, and how communication flow when decisions have to be made under pressure.
Right.
In real breaches, it's not the attack that surprises organization. I say it's their own response that surprises them because they're confused and they have no idea what to do. So, testing exposes gaps you didn't know existed before attackers do. So I would say you don't build confidence by hoping your plan works. You build it by proving it before a real incident forces the test. So that's my only advice based on this discussion.
That's very well said. Let's touch on another interesting way to do things, because oftentimes if you don't say something that's a little controversial, people might not be paying attention. We can't really afford to have that risk so much. So what's an uncomfortable question that every security leader should be asking their teams today?
Uncomfortable. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so I mean, based on this discussion, the question that I would ask, if we were breached right now, who would know and how soon? So this question cuts through the tools, dashboard, and policies. Because if answer is not immediate or specific, or if it's vague or maybe depends on assumption, it means there's a real risk right there. So in many organizations didn't learn about the incident from their own security teams, as we discussed. They find out from customers, banks, regulators, or media after weeks or months. So if you can't clearly name who get the alert, who makes the call, and how quickly action happens, then detection is not working as planned or
Right.
as planned on your paper. So I know this question may be uncomfortable, but it is powerful
Right.
because clarity, not confidence, that what expose risk.
Yeah, that's excellent. It is a really important thing to make sure that we're really asking the right questions and we're not afraid to be a little bit provocative in how we ask. So as we close out, I mean, how would you summarize the difference between assumed security and proven security?
Yeah, so that go back to our introduction. Like what I define in the assumed security is solely built on tools, policies, procedure, certification, compliance framework like ISO, SOC 2, GDPR, and other. But we know that these are important and they help establish a baseline and create a structure, but they often create a false sense of confidence because they describe what should exist, but they don't tell how well these actually works in the real world. So this is assumed security based on policies, program plan. Proven security, on the other hand, I will define is based on the evidence demonstrated through a testing, detection, and what actually fires, response, what happens quickly, and the teams that know how to act under pressure. So the proven security is measured by how fast you know something is wrong and how effectively you contain the damage. Again, I want to emphasize in real breaches, organizations don't fail because they lacked policies or certifications. They fail because assumptions were never tested. So, I mean, the final
Right.
quiz from this question is silence is not a safety. It often means you are not seeing the what matters. Visibility, testing, and response. That's what proves security.
I love that. Silence is not security. I think that's a brilliant way to put it. As we wrap, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, they want to have a conversation, maybe they've heard some things today that give them a little bit of reason to be concerned in their own organization. How do they reach out to you? What's your preferred way to be communicating with
Yes. Yes, so
folks?
people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and they can reach out to me anytime. And they can also use my personal email. I can send you my email. My name gumanc2@gmail.com. So
Excellent.
they can reach out anytime and I'm happy to mentor if anyone's interested. And I want to give away to community.
That's amazing, Guman. I really appreciate that. And I'll make sure that I put all the information in the show notes, folks. So if you want to reach out to him, I'll make it easy for you to find him. Guman, thank you so much for a practical and grounded conversation. This has been fascinating to me. I am certainly not a security wizard, but I have a lot of respect for what you do and people like you who are out there likely not resting as well as I do because there's so much horrible activity that people are trying to pull off. And the whole issue of having to defend ourselves against breach is just mind blowing to me that people are so motivated to cause that kind of havoc. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And thanks for being my guest today on the Signal Room. And to our listeners, that's it for this episode of the Signal Room. We're here to amplify the signals that matter across leadership, ethics, and innovation. So until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and stay human.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of the Signal Room. If today's conversation sparked something in you, an idea, a challenge, or a perspective worth amplifying, I'd love to hear from you. Message me on LinkedIn or visit signalroompodcast.com to explore being a guest on an upcoming episode. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and stay human.